Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Awaken Your Souls Journey podcast. I'm Angela Clement, and I am delighted to have with me today Victoria Volk. And she is a self-published author, advanced certified grief recovery specialist, creator and podcast host of Grieving Voices, Reiki master, certified biofield tuning practitioner, UMAP certified coach, and end-of-life doula. And she aims to use her strengths and skills through a variety of offerings to help those whose lives have been upended by grief and loss, and to go from surviving to thriving. So thank you, Victoria, for taking the time to be here today, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yeah. So I know a little bit about you, but not a whole bunch. And I know the listeners are going to want to hear more about you. So tell us a little bit about how you got into doing what you do now.
Well, just like in my bio, I felt like I was one of those people that was just surviving. I felt like my life was one of struggle and challenge and strife, and it was just one hit after another since childhood. It wasn't all doom and gloom, of course. I'm happily married over 20 years. We have three healthy growing children so fast. Like, one's in college, one's going to be going to college, another's going to be 16. Like, that's my youngest, so I'm going to be an empty nester in a few years. And but I wasn't always in this place, and where I feel like I'm in alignment with the work that I'm doing, and at peace with myself and at peace with my past. And it took a lot of work to get here. And what I want to share with listeners right off the bat is it doesn't have to take 30 plus years for you to have the awareness that your life doesn't have to be one of suffering. And asking for help is probably one of the hardest things for helpers to ask for. And I'm highly sensitive. I'm an empath as well, and feel things very deeply. And, that's often been felt like a curse to me. So going through grief recovery, first of all, was the catalyst for all the change in my life and my personal transformation of exponential growth, of not like I don't want to say like it was a quicker upgrade, but it really was. Like, up until I had started my personal development journey in 2014, really. My youngest was starting kindergarten. That's kind of what set it all off. And I had closed a business I had had for 10 years. I had a photography business, and my identity was like being stripped away. I was work at home mom. All of a sudden my kids weren't, that identity of being the mom, and my youngest going to kindergarten. Like, I don't know, it was just doing something to me. It was bringing up a lot of grief, I think, too, like subconsciously, or it wasn't in my awareness. I just felt like I was going crazy. I really did. And I started to have physical manifestations, and my health started to deteriorate. And I mean, I was very close to having bone marrow biopsy just to see, because I'd lost so much weight. I was badly anemic. I've always been anemic, but it was getting worse. Hair was falling out and thinning. I was kind of just really, just emotionally a train wreck, and just everything was coming to a head so quickly. And it just kind of put me on this journey of, I need to figure myself out. Like, I feel so screwed up. So got all the self-help books and the programs and just dove in. And it was like a mission to me to figure myself out. And because, again, I thought I was defective and broken and needed fixing, and something was wrong with me, right? But it really wasn't until I had a couple more losses fast forward 5 more years after that, after, in 2019, towards the end of 2018, where I realized that, yeah, this is grief. This is grief. And I need to address grief specifically, and the trauma and the grief that I experienced as a child, because my father passed away when I was 8 of cancer. But he lived for 18 months at stage 4. So he was sick for a very long time in my childhood. Like, he would have been diagnosed when I was getting to be 6 to 7 years old. So, I mean, imagine. And then at that same time, my grandmother, my mother's mom, was also dying of melanoma. So my mom had so much grief happening for her. Imagine, as a 6-year-old, 7-year-old, like I was basically shifted around from family member to neighbor to friends to, there wasn't a lot of stability around that time, because my mom had to be with her mom, and then she had to be with my dad, and he was doctoring like 3 hours away. So I quickly just, adapting was my number one strength. Actually, in 2014, adaptability was my number one strength when I took the Clifton strengths. And I can see why, right? Like, my life has been one of adapting to my circumstances. So yeah, he passed away. My mom quickly remarried within a couple of years, and it wasn't a great marriage. And I couldn't wait to graduate and get out on my own. And I did. And life was okay for a few years. And then I turned 21, where I could go drink, and that changed things. I started to use alcohol to cope. And by that time, I was in a really toxic relationship that had been going on for, at that point, 3 years. It lasted 2 more years, so 5 years. After 5 years, I ended that toxic relationship, but it should have ended at 2, kind of thing. So that was more grief, right? Like, just more grief and more grief. And yeah, so my life was a train wreck at that point. I started to really, alcohol was my drug of choice. And I was close to losing my license from fender benders and speeding tickets. And I can't believe I wasn't fired from my job, because I was tardy a lot. I was a mess. I was a real hot mess. And I said a prayer, and I'll never forget this. I was laying in I had a twin size bed at the time. You're 20 something years old, and I have a twin size bed, and laying there. And I said this prayer that I just wanted someone who was good for me. Not that necessarily that, like, forget whatever I think I need, like, just bring me what it is that is good for me. And stepped in my husband, but he was under my nose the whole time. We knew each other since high school, since we were junior years in high school. So by that time, we were friends for 7 years, and the rest is kind of history, so they say. But again, I had a couple more losses in 2017, 18, and then realized grief was my issue. I went to Google. I found the grief recovery method. I went through the program myself and certified, and it changed my life, literally changed my life. So much grief and trauma, and a lot of anger that I had suppressed. And it was like the floodgates opened. And the person I was that went down to Austin, Texas to certify and came home was very different. I was a very different person in a good way. It's transformed my parenting. It's brought me closer to my children, because not only did I process my grief through that process, but I also learned a lot about active listening, deep listening, connecting dots to our past and our present and our future, my future. Like I see grief differently, right? It taught me how to do grief differently. And that's my program. Actually, I ended up calling it Do Grief Differently. It's 12 weeks. And I use the grief recovery method as it is, formatted, because it is incredible as it is. It's evidence-based, and yeah, it's transformative. But that unlocked everything else I've done ever since. All the Reiki master, biofield tuning, UMAP, like everything came after I got all of that muck out of the way.
Yeah. What an amazing story. So beautiful.
Yeah, that was a long-winded answer.
Well, it's good to have the background, I think, for people, because a lot of people are walking a similar journey. And, when they hear your story and realize that there might be a way through, it's great to give people hope. So, one of the things I did when I started my group support was to kind of examine the definition of grief and to truly try to figure it out for myself. And I was asking other people, and as I was interviewing for summits, I would ask people, what's your definition of grief? And it's so fascinating, the different perspectives there are on that whole idea. And so I'm interested. What is your definition of grief?
Well, it is the definition that was taught to me by the grief recovery method. And that is the loss of hopes, dreams, and expectations, and anything that you wish would have been or could be different, better, or more. And if you think about that, it's not just about death. And we grieve a lot of things. I didn't even mention that I was molested too as a child. So that was within a couple of years after my dad passed, and again as a teenager. And so, it's a loss of safety and security as a child, and then being shuffled around and feeling like you're an inconvenience, to your own mother, really. And she was emotionally unavailable. I became her emotional caretaker. And because I'm an empathic and highly sensitive, so much of my youth and childhood makes sense now, having learned about myself through all the tools and things that I've worked through and used to better understand myself, and now bring to my clients, because the more we know ourselves, we can decipher what we need and recognize really what the issue is, and see ourselves clearer and see other people more clearly too, because I feel like grief puts this veil over our face and we don't see ourselves clearly. It's impossible. Like, and you can probably relate to that. Like, you look in the mirror and it's like, who is this person? Who am I? And if you're asking yourself that, like, you're not seeing other people clearly either.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So how would you see the grief recovery method as different from other ways of moving through grief?
Well, I did try therapy. I tried hypnotherapy, actually. And I'm not saying talk therapy is bad or anything like that. There's a time and a place for it, but I'm not saying groups are bad either. And I think there's a time and place for those. But if you are someone who's longing to move forward, you have to do more than just talk about how you feel. There has to be some sort of action. And the grief recovery method is an action-based program. It's a framework that you follow and go through and are guided through. And that's what I knew I needed. I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. I was sick and tired of same old stories coming up in my head, my monkey mind. And I just wanted to figure it out and fix it and be done with it, like really address it. And that grief recovery method did that for me. And it's been the energy healing work that has really helped not only boost my immune system, because I haven't even had as much as a cold in 3 years. I told my son this over the weekend because he's sick again, but he's a college student and under a lot of pressure and stress, with tests and exams and things, and living with other, students. And so he's in a different environment than I am. But I said, and I have a friend too that's sick again. And I'm just like, you know what? I can only attest it to the energy work that I do. I don't get the bugs my kids bring home from school. My daughter has got a snot nose again. It's just,
Mhm.
I think just working on yourself, keeping your emotions not in check, but like working with them and clearing your energy, how can you not boost your immune system as a result, right? Like it raises your voltage, it boosts your vitality. I credit it to that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I wholeheartedly agree because since I lost Blaine and I dive deeply into the energy healing, I've just noticed this huge transformation in my ability to, well, my resilience really
Mm-hmm. Yep.
in all kinds of circumstances. I mean, health issues would arise. I work with an energy healer, do some work on myself, and they seem to, I wouldn't say they just magically disappear, but over time, when you're working on yourself that way, you just find you become more and more healthy. And yeah, I love that about energy healing. It gives people autonomy, really, because it's not just something that you go to an energy healer. I mean, that's certainly part of it, but then we can learn it for ourselves and we can use it in our own lives. And it's so practical. You think it's a woo woo thing. And really, it's just so practical and so natural. And so, yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up. I think it's an important part of healing and really for grief, I think it speeded up the process, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's definitely aided me in processing things when they come up. And speak about magic. So we have in biofield tuning, it's called a sonic slider. And this thing is magic to me because I'm a canker sore sufferer. I had been my entire life. I always get canker sores. Some people get cold sores, right? I get canker sores. The last time I was sick was in 2021. No, yeah, 2021. And it was because my son had an accident. He was in and out of the hospital for like 6 weeks. Had a severed pancreas. Really scary time. I
Yeah.
ended up coming home with COVID. One time he was in the hospital, and I had a canker sore. I kid you not, it was pretty close to the size of a dime.
Mm.
The largest one I've ever had in my life. It was so painful, and I hadn't been using my tools in my toolbox. And that was a reminder to me that when, can I swear?
Absolutely.
When the shit hits the fan, that's when we need to double down on our self-care and double down on the things that we know help bring peace to us. And I
Right.
wasn't doing that. My self-care was totally abandoned, and I paid the price for it. And but I learned my lesson. So every time I feel a canker sore coming on the inside of my mouth, I just use this for a few minutes, goes away. In
Mhm.
fact, I just did this last week. And so this thing is magic to me because, yeah, I don't suffer from canker sores anymore. They go away. As soon as I feel it coming, I use it and they go away. So, yeah. That is magic. It's like, we have cell phones, right? And they
Yeah.
connect to cell towers, and we don't think that's woo woo. Like, how does that work?
Yeah.
Right? Kind of the same
Exactly.
principle. It's sound waves, it's frequency. That's how our cell phones connect to the towers, but we just don't think that that's even possible for us as
Mhm.
humans to
Right.
connect to energy around us.
Hmm. Yeah. And to access those healing frequencies. And there's so many different ways and modalities to, it's so available. And, it's just, I think more and more people are starting to use it and realize the benefits of it. It's taken a while, though. It's definitely taken a while.
Yeah, I mean, you've got singing bowls, you've got like the tuning forks, Reiki. I've just heard of I think you taught me about a new one that I had never heard of. What
Oh,
was that
the
again?
Wonder Method. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Mm.
there, we live in a fantastic time, and there are things out there that can be supportive and healing for our grief journey. And I think that's really one of the messages I want to bring today too, is that there is hope. Like, you don't have to feel stuck in the mud of grief and let it bring you down. And how you recognize when you are healing is that when you do have something come up and you have another loss or what have you, that, or you think of let's say someone had passed, right? And you think of that person, you're driving down the street and you drive by the place that you used to go to all the time with them. And, maybe at one time it took you down and you just felt so maybe angry, right? Who knows how the
Mhm.
relationship was, or how it ended or what have you. It could be estrangement. No one has to die, right? It could be a divorce or whatever. And maybe you feel anger, or you feel this just unbelievable sadness, and it takes you out for days. And how you know that you've started to heal that is you see it, you feel it, and you feel at peace. You feel neutral, not even neutral, but it doesn't, you feel it, but it doesn't take you down for days at a time. It's not, the edge is off the pain, it feels softer in your body.
Yeah, I've experienced that, especially lately. I'm for a while because in the beginning you have all those grief bursts that just come in at random, and it catches you off guard because you're not used to it, right? It's not something that you've been addressing really. It's been in your kind of in your subconscious, and it's just brewing. And then when it all gets brought to light with a big loss, um, you have to start really feeling it and getting into it. And wow, it's so powerful to feel those feelings. And like you're saying, once you've done that, and you realize the relief that comes from that, from feeling it and then allowing it to disperse or release, um, and let go of the charge that comes with that, because there is, like you say, there's a charge that comes with that, circumstance or the person that you're thinking about or the situation, and you can feel it coming up, and as long as it's coming up like that, it wants to be addressed. And so, it's, you almost have to be relentless with it. It's like, okay, I'm going to pay attention to you and continue to pay attention to you until you can let go, that you can release. And so, yeah, it's an interesting process, but once you've gone through it a few times, you realize that, that's the way through, and you can use it for all aspects of your life. Then anytime anger comes up, anytime sadness comes up, whether it be because of grief or because of anything, um, it's just a fantastic way of addressing those things. Um,
Can I piggyback on something?
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Please do.
So on that, it makes me think of like the energy it takes to hold it in, the energy that
Yes.
we expend to keep it together. And I just, it's like, especially for anger, for example, and Matt, like if you are not allowing the anger to move through you, just think of what happens in your body when you feel anger. Your body, you literally start to heat up. You
Mm-hmm.
feel your cheeks flush, your teeth clench, maybe your shoulders go up, you clench your fists, your jaw, you get tense, and this creates this heat in your body. And the amount of energy it takes to contain anger
Mm-hmm.
and or any multitude of emotions, right? Like just to stuff it down, the energy that that expends. It's like no wonder people are exhausted. Chronic fatigue syndrome. Really? You're stuffing a lot of shit is what you're doing. Fibromyalgia. There's no reason. There's no explanation for what do you think it is? It's a lot of stuff in the energy field in the body that's not being released and let go. And just it takes energy to hold it in, but the energy that you'll expend to release it, once you do, it frees up energy. It's like these everything is energy. Emotions are energy. We are made up of mostly water. If we're dehydrated and angry and depressed, what are people around you seeing? What are people around you feeling? It's your quality of life is not one of vibrancy and joy and hope of you're not even you're blocking your own potential of a joyful life. So I don't know. That was a tangent, but
Yeah. Well,
it
and
just, yeah, I've learned the energy, like just look at the energy of the emotions and what it takes to just to keep it in.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
not worth it.
Yeah. And I know that, I was in that place, you were in that place, a lot of other people are in that place, and it's like, I don't want to be in that place anymore. I don't want to be in the place where I'm having sadness and I'm trying to get rid of it, where I'm trying to get rid of my anger because I know what that does. And so once you start to realize that it's okay to be sad, it's okay to be angry, but it's not okay to keep pushing it away and avoiding it. And so how can people start to embrace it more?
Well, I think it's acknowledging it first because so many people. I had a booth at an event, a mystical expo event. I had a booth, and this woman came to stop by my booth and talk to me. And her friend, she was like, the friend was like, I think you should get a session with her because I was offering. It's called a locus coeruleus reset. It's what releases norepinephrine when your body is under stress, and it's basically to calm the nervous system and reset that. It's described as a nucleus. It's not even a gland. It's it's at the brainstem anyway. And so I was offering those sessions, and her friend was like, I think you need a session. She's like, well, I don't have grief. I said, oh, we all have grief. No one has to die for us to grieve.
Mm-hmm.
She's like, she thought about it for a second. She's like, yeah, I have grief. It's like we don't even recognize that we have grief because nobody died,
Right.
and that's just not the case. Even if you had a grandparent that died, that it was a loving relationship, and there's something that you might feel incomplete with that relationship. Maybe you didn't visit them enough. Maybe you didn't get to say what you wanted to say before they passed. There's something emotional that you're likely holding on to, even if it's positive.
Mm-hmm.
These are still grieving moments, or these are things we still grieve, right? We can grieve positive things too. And over time, if we don't recognize that it is grief, and we either implode or we explode, we resort to behaviors and things that to help us feel better, like alcohol or shopping or pornography or gambling or relationships, recurrent relationships, like a revolving door. Like you can never be alone. You always have to have somebody. Lose a pet. Well, you just get another one. You replace the loss. I mean, these are the things that we do to feel better. Yeah, and it becomes a vicious cycle unless we break the pattern, learn new knowledge, learn new tools to recognize the behavior, connect the dots for ourselves, recognize that our past is informing our present and it will inform the future. It's that old cliche, history repeats itself, because it does. We just don't connect the dots that it's grief. And if you've experienced trauma in your life, and it doesn't have to be big T trauma, it could be anything that's comes at you too fast, too soon, too much, and your body can't process it fast enough, that can be trauma. And trauma is what happens, and grief is what's left. It's the energetics of that experience that you hold in your body, the feeling that you had.
Yeah. Well described. Thank you. Appreciate that.
I could talk a lot about grief is my jam, energy is my jam, so I could talk all day.
Yes. And tell everyone a little bit more about, the work that you do, your podcast, where they can find you.
Yeah. So my website is theunleashedheart.com. And I've links to all the things on there. My podcast is Grieving Voices. It's been going on now. June was 4 years. So about 4.5 years. It's a weekly podcast. I have a lot of free resources on my website. I have meditations I've created. My book is on there, self-published that. Actually, my book was in the editing phase when I had another loss. My father's uncle, or my father's brother, my uncle, was diagnosed with brain cancer. And so another thing I didn't say was when my dad passed away, that entire family was no longer in my life. So I not only lost my father, but I lost my grandparents were no longer in my life, aunts and uncles, cousins. I didn't see my uncle again for 30 years until the day I walked into his hospital room after he was diagnosed. And I just felt this pull to go see him, and I did. And it was a really transformative experience, I think, for both of us. I didn't go for myself. I just felt this pull, like he needed this probably as much as I did, for not even closure, but just to, I don't know. I really think it was my dad just kind of directing me. Now, I feel that.
Yeah.
Because why else would I walk into a hospital room after 30 years? And I mean, who would do that? I mean, I had to have been like, I didn't know if he'd even recognize me, if he'd want to see me, I had no idea. It was really putting myself in outside my comfort zone for sure. But it was like a mission. And we had 6 months to reconnect. Drank a Pabst Blue Ribbon with him one day, and we didn't even talk about the old stuff really. It was just just to reconnect, and it was a really healing experience for me. And so again, maybe another message for your listeners is that even we're past these stories from other generations in our families. These stories are passed down to us, and we don't have to accept those stories. We can change the narrative of what we want that story to be. And I no longer wanted to feel this anger or resentment or what have you, because my uncle wasn't in my life, and he abandoned me or us or whatever after his brother passed away. But he was grieving too. And we don't know the whole story all the time. And sometimes it's what we don't know that is really creating the most grief in our lives. And I think if we can look at each other as grievers and see the soul of the person and recognize that we're all fallible, we all make mistakes, we all have regrets, I think what I gave him was compassion, and what I got was healing. And I'm about to cry just thinking about it,
Mm-hmm.
because these are, it's the stories that we tell ourselves that are fed to us that, you know, aren't always true, or it's that person's truth, right?
Right.
It's what that person believes to be true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thanks for sharing that.
Anyway, yeah. So anyway, everything's on my website. Yeah, that was a whole side tangent too, but yeah, everything's on my website. I do, like I said, Do Grief Differently is a 12-week one-on-one program. I do offer groups online too. And there's Helping Children with Loss is another program. I have a pet loss program that's self-paced. I'm going to be launching an energy healing membership soon. Um, yeah, just a lot of things in the works, creative
Yeah.
things in the works that, yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah. You've got a lot going on. And so I encourage people, if they're resonating with you, to check out your website, to check out all of those things she just mentioned and whatever else she forgot to mention that's on there, because there's probably more.
yeah.
And is there anything else you'd like to share before we go?
I just want people to feel a sense of hope. And I don't know when this is going to air, but I know the holidays are coming up.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing a special series on grief, holiday grief, where I'm looking at different aspects of grief during the holidays. Um, give yourself grace, give yourself compassion, show other people compassion. It's if you're in the United States, it's a really crazy
Mm-hmm.
time, society wise. And, a lot of differing opinions, I'm sure, within families, and it can create a lot of grief. And, you know, boundaries are great. I never knew a boundary if it slapped me in the face before grief recovery. That's another thing that it taught me, was that I didn't have boundaries, and I didn't recognize other people's boundaries. Especially if you're a child of sexual abuse in any way, your boundaries have been stripped away. Like, you don't even know
Yeah.
what they are. So I had to learn a lot about safety and security, and creating that for myself, within myself, and finding peace as a result. And it's possible. I just want people to know it's possible. And it doesn't have to take 30 plus years.
Yeah, I like that you've come around full circle to that again, because we always say that you have to do the work. You have to step into it. You have to do the work. You can't just sit by passively and hope that you will heal. And it doesn't take forever.
Doesn't have to. Yeah.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
don't have to listen to the story that you're going to feel this way forever because
Oh,
I do, or
yes.
I feel that way, right? That's a story that you're taking on that isn't yours.
Yeah. Yeah.
Rewrite your own story, create your own story. It's your book you're writing.
Excellent. Love that. Thanks again so much for taking the time today. And I'm encouraging people to check out Victoria's resources. And I want to thank everyone for listening. And bye for now.